This is the sixth part of the video series on the Spanish Civil War. If you want to watch the previous parts, I will leave links to those in the description below. With that said, enjoy. With the recent Battle of Brunete being an absolute and irredeemable disaster for the Republic, it was becoming increasingly evident that the Republic was on the losing side of the war. The Nationalists had gained the initiative and were becoming more and more armed as time went by, gathering more military gear and swelling the ranks of their army, all whilst confidence in the Republic was dismal and political divisions between their factions were getting even worse. Just as this was occurring, the Nationalists were making steady progress in the north, threatening to completely absorb the Basques in Asturias by the end of the year at such a rate. In the eastern part, the Basques tried to build what they called the Iron Ring around the city of Bilbao by the end of May of 1937. However, it was hardly an effective defense, as it was poorly built and they never had time to complete it. Despite brave fighting by the Basques and the international brigades, by the end of June they were overrun thanks to nationalist air superiority and Bilbao was captured. Both sides suffered around 30,000 casualties in this battle, but the Basques suffered many more fatalities amongst their losses. Meanwhile, things in the western region of Asturias weren't going much better either, as the nationalists kept pushing forward. The Republicans were plagued with demoralization and confusion within their ranks, which wasn't helped by the fact that many were drinking heavily to relieve their despair. This was along a critical shortage of equipment. The only time when the nationalists were halted was during July when they had to deal with the attack on Brunete. After such a hold-up, the Carlists, along with the help of Italian brigades, opened a ferocious offensive on the 14th of August. At first, traversing the mountainous terrain was a little tricky, but their superior artillery was able to wreck the defenders with blunt force. The Republicans were soon retreating, and by the end of the month, the Nationalists were in striking distance of the city of Santander. The Nationalists made sure to fully crush Basque identity wherever they went, outlawing their flag, the Ikurriña, and forbidding the use of the Basque language. To date, the Basques remember these events with bitterness. In order to relieve the northerners, the Republic tried to organize an offensive along the eastern front of Aragon, as a distraction could divert the Nationalists' attention and give the north enough time to reorganize a defense. There was also a secondary objective of capturing the city of Zaragoza, which was a major communication hub, and knocking it out would be a major setback for the enemy. This began with the gathering of T-26 tanks and aircraft along several divisions. The attack began on the 24th of August, however it soon ran into the same problems that were encountered in the Battle of Brunete, namely slow and disorganized progress along with stiff resistance, which was causing them to suffer heavy casualties. Within only a few days, it became rather obvious that they were never going to be able to reach Zaragoza, so instead the commanders decided to settle on capturing the small town of Belchite. On the 1st of September, the town was reached, and the Republicans proceeded to reduce its rubble with artillery and airstrikes. When they decided to move in and conquer it, they were met with staunch Carlist defenders who had dug themselves into the ruined buildings. After 5 days of brutal street fighting, the defenders finally surrendered, but only after the town had been reduced to a useless pile of ashes. The failure of this campaign was followed by finger-pointing from all of the Republican factions, especially the Communists, who blamed the internal sabotage. Just to add salt to the wounds of this tragedy, the initial objective of the offensive to relieve the Northerners was hardly achieved either. The whole of September and October were marked by a constant slow retreat by the Basques throughout the mountains. Whilst they were able to use the terrain for a valiant defense, the nationalist planes were relentlessly bombing them and were outnumbered by at least 2-1 on the ground. The city of Santander had fallen by the 21st of October, and soon afterwards the last stronghold, Gijón, had surrendered. The fall of the northern front proved to be a crucial victory for the nationalists, as they now had access to the heavy industry and coal mines of the region. What was more, it also meant that the elite Carlist formations could be deployed in the south. The scales of the strength continued to be tipped in the favor of the nationalists throughout the war, as their numbers and their armies kept on growing whilst the numbers of the Republicans stagnated. This was whilst the ideals which the Second Spanish Republic had been founded on were being eroded by its own leadership. Juan Negrin was beginning to deploy secret police and implement more repressive measures in order to quell a recent bout of discord within the territory. The place was slowly turning into a quasi-Stalinist regime with re-education camps and a rise of disappearances of political dissenters, all whilst aid from Stalinist Russia was decreasing. The Republican elites were desperately looking for a major victory to hopefully turn the tide, or at the very least, give them a chance to negotiate a favourable peace deal. For a time, it seemed like the Nationalists were going to initiate this battle, as Franco was planning yet another attempt to take Madrid ever since the Battle of Brunete. The Nationalists were planning to launch an attack from the northeast of the city and completely surround it, a plausible operation, as they had far greater numbers than the beginning of the war when it was first attempted. The Republic was able to gain wind of these plans, and military officers decided that they needed to mount a sort of pre-counteroffensive to prevent this. They decided that they could strike the small city of Teruel, which found itself right in the corner of the front line. The plan was to surround and capture it. Afterwards, a defensive would be mounted to fight the inevitable nationalist counterattack. It was a lofty plan, but desperation infested the high command, and the operation was given the go-ahead. On the 14th of December, the Republicans launched a major assault on the outskirts of the town. Weather conditions were hellish, dripping to temperatures below freezing and with thick snowfall, as the region was notorious for cold winters. At first, the Republicans were able to make rapid gains, having taken the meager defenders by complete surprise. The infantry was able to go all around the area within a few days, and by the 18th, they had completely surrounded the city from the outskirts. Franco and the rest of the Nationalist High Command were taken aback when they heard the news. At first, there was debate as to whether or not they should postpone the attack on Madrid in order to save a small city that was in their eyes rather insignificant. Franco decided that a response was needed and gave the order to divert the troops to relieve the defenders. However, it wouldn't be simple, since the cold weather was going to make it difficult to move troops there quickly. Nonetheless, a hastily put together army of artillery and infantry made its way to the scene as fast as it could. Now that time was running out, the Republicans began entering Teruel on the 21st of December. The street fighting quickly devolved into some of the most horrific of the entire Civil War, with soldiers having to battle their way through defenses by painstakingly clearing each building one by one, which involved the frequent use of grenades and bayonets. Thousands of civilians were killed in the chaos, and many structures were irreparably damaged. The freezing conditions also froze the pipes solid, making it difficult to find water to drink. Eventually, most of the town was taken, and the Republicans reclaimed victory after several days. However, the fight was still far from over, let alone won. The Nationalists had slowly assembled a counter-offensive and attacked on the 29th, opening the single largest artillery bombardment in the entire war. They then launched 10 divisions against the city. However, the outcome was rather limited, as the poor weather and thick snow was disrupting their swiftness. By the 1st of January, the front lines were practically static. It was so cold that tanks were completely immobile, and the Condor Legion simply couldn't take off to aid the Nationalists. Both sides were suffering heavy casualties from frostbite, and supplying the men was proving a nightmarish task. All this time, Franco was stressing to the defenders in Teruel to hold out for just a little longer, as they would eventually be relieved. But they surrendered to the Republicans on the 7th, their situation being too desperate. The Nationalists were distraught that Teruel had surrendered and swore to retake the city by any means necessary. On the 17th of January, the weather had mostly cleared up and a furious attack was launched. The artillery and aerial bombardment brought incredible devastation to the city, and the Republicans were both exhausted and outnumbered. The Nationalists also launched a massive offensive in the north, which swung around the flanks, threatening their supply lines. By the onset of February, the cold weather had disappeared, allowing major gains to be made. Realizing that the battle was as good as lost, the Republican fighters still in Teruel made a run for it before they could be completely encircled. By the 22nd of February, the last of them had cleared from the destroyed shell that was once a city. In all, the Nationalists had suffered a total of 40,000 casualties in battle. The Republicans had suffered a total of 60,000 casualties and far more aircraft, most of which were crashes as a result of poor flying conditions. It wouldn't be completely inappropriate to call Teruel the Stalingrad of Spain, given the street fighting in sub-zero temperatures and the fact that it was the deadliest battle in the war. However, the engagement wouldn't end there, as Franco was now seizing the opportunity to launch a bold counteroffensive, which would be the final blow to the Republic.